Okay, yeah, I was making some audio recordings, and I was kind of like thinking about Nelson, the identical twin brothers, that sang After the Rain, and it's kind of thinking about for Amber Waves of Grain, Amber Waves of G Rain. It seemed to be the G and the B in venue. It seemed to be something about South American subcontinent mind chase band 181 in Houston, Texas, electronic power, selective service and we international. The 1992 inaugural ball with William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton, Al Gore, and hosted by Chevy Chase for the 1992 presidential inaugural ball. He'd refer to his own words being that introduced himself and that he's the host, and said that he's a host. And I was kind of like thinking about the baptism thing about and it seemed to be like really almost now with all the linguistic alphanumerics that somewhere between Latin America and like the Persian Gulf, it seemed to be like a mandatory requirement. And the location of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, seemed to be the thing about baptism. Like HTTP colon, the colon being like a 90 degree, what would be like a 1 cycle per second oscillation with a center line of oscillation at one frequency above and below it. A 90 would be like a circle with a dot in it. The colon would be like just a dot. Yet at another 90 degree, it would look like maybe the double forward slash of the colon. And I was thinking about that, because I'm on supplemental security income, okay. And I started thinking about something about somewhere between the Persian Gulf and Latin America and the Deep Star 6 thing, about the spore stone and the forecast, and a lot of information that would lead to information that would link the idea of like jurisprudence. I'm kind of like on, I've heard it and I've known it for a long time. About I like to sprite in the pastel colors, the different shades of like pastels, and it's like the golf course, on the green or like on a putt with what is now like the song that like I've been like really thinking about. Even more so here lately. And it seemed to be that song by Atlanta Miles, Black Velvet. And it's almost like the pastels of the jurisprudence book in the library with the black back, being like the black velvet, and like the velvet being like the Bermuda grass on the green, fixing a putt, and the color of the book jurisprudence in the pastel green like the golf course. And it seemed to be the thing about the one thing about the one word in warehousing being repudiation, linking real estate and state statutes annotated, and like litigation factors, habeas corpus seemed to be the thing about identifying deed restrictions that way as absentee voting, carbon footprints, or the thing about mechanics liens, as some idea like a claim, whether it be loss prevention or the idea of suppression as a method of banking. And the thing with this is almost like foster granting, combining the pseudo with the Pell Grants, like foster granting and adoption. It's almost in a way of like presenting the issue of like presence in family law. The thing with this is that ultimately it seemed to be really a principle of like Route 66, okay, being like the Better Business Bureau. Michael Jackson, his initials are like MJ and 23, like PG, the PG-13, the PG being 23, and Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi. And Michael Jackson and Zayn, it seemed to be that he wears that white glove, okay, and the glove's about like 61 in a miracle, okay. The thing with this is that he seemed to be the thing about deed restrictions in a way of like 23, and some of the songs that he sings, it kind of presents the information is like affirmative between the bogey and the boogie, what the deal is about on par terminology as compared to, you've probably heard it before, I like to sprite in it. And it seemed to be the thing about somewhere in my mind, it seemed to be to ocean or not to ocean. It's kind of like I'm kind of like thinking about the Mexico thing about remember the Alamo, and that word relation between architecture platform and embedded encryption. And it's kind of like I've been thinking quite a bit about it, because it seems that Nelson, okay, it reminds me automatically of the C.A. Nelson Auditorium on North Galveston, Pearland, Texas, at Pearland High School, okay. Well, in any case, so they sing that one song After the Rain. It's kind of like it's kind of like iron ore is like, it's kind of like gravel, but it's really not gravel. It's like a burnt orange, or like University of Texas, okay. And the way it's been presented, it's like it was like before even the infrared and the infragreen. I mean, now that it's like being presented, it's kind of like a thermal heat seeking, but it's really not like limited to that. But it suggests electronic surveillance in that way. The thing with this is that it seemed to be the thing about identifying the delta force of a Deep Star 6 as like the Pulse Club in Orlando. Tony Orlando and the Dawn, it's kind of like tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years, and it seems to be the 3 years. And I was just mentioning it. Something about the additive services and byproducts. And I'll have to think about it. I mean, I just like started thinking about it here recently, and it seemed to be the 3 years of like I think it's the Great Expectations and the Catalyst ads in Houston Chronicle, and I'm thinking that might be maybe the 3 long years that Tony Orlando might be saying, because it's kind of like Great Expectations like having whole page ads. Okay, I mean for like a 6-week period every Sunday for sure, Saturday and Sunday. I mean they were like having whole pages, half pages, quarter pages, with like Great Expectations and the deal about Catalyst. It was like thing about degreed stuff about Catalyst. And the thing with this is that it's kind of like with like neurotransmitters, receptors, and inhibitors. It kind of gives similarities of electronic power, kind of like a catalyst, but like attenuation is suggested as slowing down the process of digital signal processing speed as compared to rectification. And I'm not sure if that's absolutely true all the time with like attenuation, but something about the chemistry, like a perpendicular spiral in 1 cycle per second, with a center line of oscillation at a 9-degree presents that perpendicular spiral, even like a spray in a bed. The thing with this is that channel 20, 26, and 39 is out on the west side of Highway 288, and they were presenting the signal as like a perpendicular spiral. Mattress Mac and the Gallup version is like no more back orders. Okay. And the thing with this is that it seems that something about Al Qaeda had mentioned in between the Al Qaeda, Barack Obama referring to like the Persian Gulf and Al Qaeda. But I was like really, I've been thinking quite a bit about the misappropriation allocation in the Mississippi, and the ISS and the SSI, the International Superstar in Supplemental Security or Superstar Intelligence, or the International Secret Service and Superstar Intelligence, Supplemental Security Income, and all that stuff about the acronym. And Lexus, okay, here's the things that Lexus IS 350 and 450 hybrid seem to be the thing, because here's the deal about my drums, my Pearl Vision VSX drums, is that it has the ISS mounting system, okay, and Pearl's like 52 and hard. The thing about plural would be like hard with the S and 71 in parallel. And the thing with this is that all this information seems to be the monetary and domestic aggregates of neighborhoods that seem to be that the wooden buffalo nickel seems to be the factor of identifying like states and embassies that would maybe present the idea of like the difference between like suppression and loss prevention. Yet the thing with it is that it almost presents that wooden buffalo nickel about coffee. With 1D it's like 76, with 2Ds it's like 80, and with like 3Ds it's like 84, like 84 lumber being like 71, lumber being 71 in Pearland. And the thing about states plural and an embassy being 84. The thing with it is that the Social Security Administration's phone number, 1-800-772-1213, is ultimately like 12 and 13, the LNM of like Lockheed Martin and like legal media. The thing it is that ultimately, based upon my Perth here, in the same column going straight down from like A to Z, 1 to 26, then 27 to like 52, then 53 to like 78, 79 to 104. Like straight down in the L column, it's like 12. It goes straight down to 64. Okay, and right next to it, the LNM, the phone number 12 and 13 of the Social Security, it's like 1964 and 65 being 83 and 84. And the thing about the wooden buffalo nickel seems to be it presents the issue of like the telephone number linking, like it's like a baptism in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, of like network operations. And I've been thinking about that because of GMC raising the bar, and the IBM, it's like the difference between Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa 5, the 23 English alphabetical letters, and the acronym Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi. Some of the highest degree levels that seem to be somewhere, you know, in a combine of like quantum and, you know, going beyond calculus, into the quantum thing about, you know, chemistry, as well as like certain factors that seem to be like the introduction of like the perpendicular spiral, one cycle of frequency at a 90 degree as compared to the bandwidth and spectrum that might give the similarities. It really, that in like a 13 band graphic equalizer is just speeding up and slowing down chosen spectrum of a 13 band graphic equalizer, although like a 31 band graphic equalizer, they're all chosen bandwidth and spectrum to identify, like, you know, the range, and all the lever does is actually speed it up or slow it down and changes the pitch. But with waveform, it doesn't change the pitch or its quality. It does, it speeds it up, but it doesn't lose its original sound based upon the speed of processing. So there's a difference between like frequency and like waveform that way. The thing with this is that Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania seemed to be a thing about you know, the baptismal booth. Okay, in education it kind of presents the information as you know, a Wilkes booth thing, but you know, ultimately, you know, the bar, GMC Racing the Bar, I mean, it seemed to be that seemed to be like the location of the Social Security Administration network operations centers that it refers to, like the bar and a baptism, and it seemed to be like something in my mind of like a Deep Star 6, and to ocean or not to ocean, to be or not to be, and it seemed to be thinking about, you know, a relation in that way. And I've been thinking about the alimony. It's just now kind of like sinking in about, you know, maybe the thought of what maybe alimony is or is not, as compared to misappropriation, allocation of the Mississippi. The thing is that Nelson sings that song After the Rain, okay? And I've been thinking about that amber waves of G-rain green, because it's like a burnt orange of like a nanoluminescence, like night vision, like the infrared and the infragreen you see on world news. But like they've been showing it here recently, but it seemed to be like even before all that was available, like in the beginning kind of like thing, you know. The thing with this is that there's like iron ore in my parents' driveway, okay? It's like gravel, okay, but it's like a burnt orange, okay? And it's like IRONNORE. And the thing with this is that it seemed to be like something in between, like, you know, the Dream Theater music video, Sacrifice Sons, and the name Randall Garcia is the producer, and George Bush is in it, okay? And it has the similarities of George Bush Sr., like with the static on the television, and him moving his lips, and then like the camera like zooms in on his lips, but you can't really hear it. Well, it was kind of like that in that video, like progression. And I don't know if it's just like editing, but you know, certain factors of like 9/11 and that one particular, it's like a cargo jet, and it has the similarities of like a Soviet Union Russian jet, except it's not a cargo jet. And I saw that, I was kind of like thinking about it, because it's almost like a lifted up high thing, but there's like a small room of paneling going. Okay, you know, when I'm referring to like a Stargate program, or when I normally say like I was taken to, it's like normally because of when I was going through the circuit, like there's like a bunch of air raids, okay, while I was asleep, and I mean some really like serious intense stuff, and ultimately, you know, I don't like really referring to it to the brain freeze, you know, it's some idea of secrets of the temple, or some frozen Neanderthal, Paleolithic, Anglo-Saxon. The thing with this is that it's almost, you know, the thing about like a white zombie, that the Walking Dead thing, in the mind's eye of like a military barrel determined. The thing with this is that there's like a specific location, and it seemed to be that cargo jet. It's like it has a scale, like a ratio, what HTTP:// would be, as you know, the colon, yet the ratio and // and it almost seems like that all the information provided in the 60s Temple How the Federal runs the country, of the history of the U.S. dollar in Latin America, Latin being 56, or like drum or light, and the thing with this is that going beyond like the Bureau of Vital Certificates of a birth certificate, or the thought of maybe even the thought of like digitized graffiti and confetti, and the difference between the E and the EE. Confetti and graffiti, I mean, it's the EE, I mean, like a birth certificate footprint, and the idea of like a forecast, It seemed to be, even the thought of like a protective forecast is like biometric fingerprints beyond, like even paper made. And the thing about graphite seemed to be the metallic particle, like even going through like a dry toner as compared to the paste of like fingerprints and paper, into the electronic side of like, beyond the biometrics of a bunch of white stuff, a bunch of invisible programming of like light scribe. The thing with this is that all that information is kind of like presented like the Deep Star 6 as a 6-point star, as compared to the Israeli flag, and it's kind of like the difference between day and night. And the thing about Univision here in the Houston area, they presented like the 3 pastels in a black, the 3 pastels in a white. But everything, the way everything is kind of like happened, kind of like it seemed to be like almost like a requirement, actually, kind of like getting into the to ocean or not to ocean, and the Ocean 12 thing. And I'm just kind of like, thinking about how that is, in my mind, identifying the Delta Force of the information and the secrets of temple outfits over the country in Latin America, as compared to Barack Obama's reference to, Al-Qaeda. And the thing about Al-Qaeda in my mind is like the misappropriation of allocation, being allocate, and then ultimately, allocate, then okay, then occasion. And then ultimately, instead of the C being pronounced like K, like ocean. And the thing with it is that 1 second of the N in Latin terminology applied to the acronym OSHA. It's like the science software, the Vice President networks, and like a biblical scripture of the Lord Jesus Christ saying that He knew you before the foundations of the earth. It's like almost like importing and exporting that way of like religion, yet importing and exporting like gross national product and plain horizons. And all the information that would identify, the idea that monetary and domestic of neighborhoods would be some idea of like the wooden buffalo nickel identifying, coffee. Yet, it seemed to be the 3D International and chasing Capital One out in that area. And it's almost like the World Trade Center in one way, and yet the other is kind of like the hot cafe, the actual alphanumeric letters of like the value of the symbol between the C and the PTIS of the US $1. And then it gets to, the one thing about the halo left side, and like center point energy, and it's like the Eurodollar thing about it is what it really gets to. And the International Electronic Engineering identify a schematic symbol that's almost virtually identical to the backside of the US $1 bill, knowing one thing about, the halo left side being like a field scope and range, the accuracy of like, a scope, yet with a laser it'd be like, center point energy. And the smart meter, the thing with this is that Mercedes-Benz, introduced like the smart car, the smart for two. And then, it's kind of like, it leads to, me anyway, it's like looking for information like that, to like the Scion IQ and the Saturn sky about the rainbow and the Chevrolet Geo Prism and the colors of like a diamond and a rainbow and like the northern lights, and measured in nanoluminous that would like even be, the infrared, the infragreen and the amber. And that's my thing about that one thing about the Nelson song. It seemed to be that Nelson, the identical twins, in that one song, it seemed to be that, the amber waves of G-rain. And the reason why I'm referring to a baptism, because it seemed to be like the SixFlags thing as the origin of like Astroworld and like the Barrel of Fun. Ultimately getting to like a huge centrifuge, and Sarbanes-Oxley financial instruments of Sox compliance being like Chicago White Sox, the Boston Red Sox, and like a centrifuge separating the red and white blood cell. In any case, so like it goes on and on about certain information, and then it gets to the fact of plasma that seemed to be that the Jehovah's Witnesses had brought up that in the event of an actual emergency that they would not accept a blood transfusion, only plasma. And at the time, like that was like information, and the plasma television screen, as far as I know, was not even available. I'm not real clear about plasma, if it's actually artificial or synthetic, or a further derivative, or a combine. I'm not real sure exactly what to think about plasma sometimes, but I know it's supposed to be like the white blood cell in white. I'm not sure it's, like I say, if it's a derivative or synthetic, or actual, derivative from the white blood cell itself. I'll actually have to think about it. But anyway, so like the thing about that one particular song of Amber Waves of Grain for Purple Mountains Majesty above the fruited plain, the fruited plain, it's almost like the idea of like a plateau of Mount Olives. You know, the one word Book of Thessalonians being the transfiguration and ascending into the sky and re-entering into heaven, okay? For purple mountains majesty above the fruited plain. And it seemed to be the thing, you know, in between the plateau, representing, you know, like Mount Olives and like even Moses, and thing it seemed to be like ultimately, you know, like the difference between like Theodore to Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal Act and the energy thing in between. It seemed to be like the thing of like International Electronic Engineering and OPEC. And it seemed to be, you know, almost like the 10 Commandments, you know, with 5 on each side, 2 tablets, almost like a 10-star general. And it seemed to be like the whole idea of Moses being 71 in Pearland. It seemed to be almost like a difference between center point energy and all that, the newer thing about like Texas New Mexico Power for like transmission distribution service provider. Texas New Mexico Power, it removed the region 0 for like every region of its own geographic attachment, being like region 0 like everywhere all over the world. And yet, you know, it would kind of like place the citizenship, and how true it is about, you know, a news anchor. It's still like liquid equity and maritime law to me. But it seemed to be, you know, the deal about monetary and domestic of like neighborhoods is the issue. Instead of like a commercial venue, living quarters like built of like I-beams and glass, and, you know, not affected by television programming. The thing is that song by Nelson, After the Rain, it seemed to be in my mind somehow Amber Waves of Grain, the Amber Waves of G-Rain, and like Chevy Chase like introducing himself as the host for like the 1992 Presidential Inaugural Ball. And it seemed to be, you know, the host and the ghost. And the one biblical scripture about, you know, baptism, you must be first baptized with the water, and not many days hence. And hence seemed to be, I mean, the word of the Oval Office, and anatomy, and relation, and the Easter egg basket, and about, you know, Easter being the resurrection after the 3rd day. And then ascending from Mount Olives and, you know, into the sky and then re-entering heaven. The thing is that, you know, globalization seemed to be the thing that in my mind represents almost like the egg, yet at the same time like the toilet. But here's the thing about what I'm thinking about the Six Flags baptism is that it seemed to be, you know, in between the psychic war, America's Foremost Psychic Spy, and the cover-up being like Route 66 and a bird bath. I mean, the book covered like Psychic War, America's Foremost Psychic Spy, and the cover up the top secret CIA Stargate program. I mean, the guy's underwater, okay? But it's like shallow, okay? The thing with this is that it's like the automatic thing in my mind of like Michael Jackson saying it's easy as 1, 2, 3, ABC. It's you and me, and it's almost like the deal between like ABC 13 Houston all the way to ABC 7 in Los Angeles, and a difference of like 6. And Theodore to Franklin, and even 1995 to 2001 at the World Trade Center. The thing with this is that, you know, ABC and like 1, 2, 3 is like 6. Like pi r squared would be like Route 66. And the baptism is kind of like the Route 66 seemed to me, I mean, you know, the Better Business Bureau bird baptism thing about Route 66. BBB and BBB that way, of like pi r squared being like E equal MC squared, I mean that way. And it seemed to be identifying the monetary and domestic about, you know, 66 being like family and only. And it seemed to be, you know, the difference between presidential, executive, and legislative of like commercial venue, of the venue, not necessarily a building or a neighborhood, or a hotel, or, I mean, and not affected by television programming. And it seemed to be the thing about, you know, something that would be, you know, the total freedoms that would give the impression maybe a protected patent. And how true it is about, you know, product registration, or the thought of like what I've been really thinking about here lately. There's the difference between, you know, the alphanumerics of like 69 from like, you know, Mexico, and that one word identifying the history of the U.S. dollar in the book, 60 symbol, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, involving that 69 word, mammon. The thing with this is that there's a transition on an analytical, kind of like a degreed, educated Christian science, that practical application of like, I mean, like political science, and there's like an academic transition that would give the impression of degree and almost like a baptism, and somewhere between like Al-Qaeda, the Persian Gulf, and Barack Obama's reference, I mean, you know, being like a color code, being black, and like constitutional law, and state statutes annotated, or even the thought of like the blackbird being a pagan idolatry of like the black statue of the blackbird. And during the Ten Commandments, you know, it's kind of like the pagan idolatry thing. And it seemed to be, you know, almost like the deal about immigration custom enforcement and the thing about a novice and that word relation. And, you know, Babylon and Pearland, even thought now, it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of been thinking about, you know, the Alamo. And really, I mean, I've always kind of like known about, you know, alimony. I've heard it phrased as alimony, palimony. And I don't know what the real issue is between the alimony and palimony, other than, you know, knowing that the P is like the deal about proper English American composition. The thing with this is that phrase about remember the Alamo is kind of like, you know, the thing about, you know, Astroworld being like turning into Six Flags and then moving to San Antonio and being Fiesta, Texas, and it seemed to be the thing about supplemental security income being the 310, the sub-treas 310 of like supplemental security is the number for it, but the area code for like you know, San Antonio is like 210, but it seemed to be somewhere in my mind that presents the EBT, something of that in the 100 club between 210, the area code, and the number of the supplemental security income as 310, and the EBT being electronic benefits transfer. But the thing about a student loan being combined with a Pell Grant, it's almost like family law, having some idea of foster granting, you know, a combine of a student loan combined with a Pell Grant is like foster granting and an adoption. I mean, it's almost like family law. At the same time, it presents the issue like, you know, Lexus LFSA, and it's almost that the deal about Mercedes presenting, you know, the 3-point. It's almost like the pi r squared, the 3.1416, the 1416 being 30, like Manchester Love 30, or secret de facto. And you know, the thing is I was kind of like thinking about that secret de facto and the remember the Alamo, and you know, alphanumerically, you know, Texas and Mexico, and the thing about Jehovah and the history of the U.S. and Latin America suggesting Mammon. But see, the thing about Mexico and Latin America is that it's not region 1, it's region 0 to the United States and Canada. Yet the thing about, you know, the euro dollar, I mean, in pronunciation, I mean, it's automatically the word dollar, yet it presents like the euro dollar and the halo left side of that symbolic representation, which is actually region 2 of Europe. The thing with this is that it presents all that like center point energy in a smart meter, and Mercedes-Benz, you know, introducing and distributing the smart card, the smart for 2, and it's like the similarities of Chuck Woolery saying the 2 and 2 thing, and the love connection and all that stuff about, you know, information is almost like the 2 and 2 thing of Chuck Woolery and the love connection is almost like to ocean or not to ocean of the Deep Star 6 of 2 Delta forces of the Israeli flag as compared to the Deep Star 6. And it seemed to be a thing about the Deep Star 6 and not limited to the Spore Stone that's used in orthopedic surgery, almost like a forecast of Wind International and the weather, suggesting, really, it's kind of like the clams in the river, and the Spore Stone and the coral reefs is kind of like, you know, who put them there is more really what the issue is. I mean, like, how they really get there is what the real issue is, okay? The thing with this is that the misappropriation and allocation of the Mississippi seem to be the thing about allocation becoming allocate and occasion and ultimately ocean, and that one cycle of frequency above the letter N, it seems to be the thing that is identifying, you know, normally like the name Pena, yet one cycle of frequency is kind of like the Delta Force identifying like a triangle. It's an electronic schematic symbol of the Delta Force being the triangle. Yet a pi r squared of that would be like a 6-point star, and you know, all of a sudden it would look like a practical application that E equal MC squared, you know, about it. The thing with this is that the song by Nelson, it's like after the rain, it's kind of like the baptism of like, it seemed to be like William Jefferson, Clinton, Al Gore, and Chevy Chase, and it just seemed to be the one about like we international selective service and electronic power in Houston, Texas, and everything about Houston alphanumerics, and even Fairland as like a alphanumerics band like Alphanumerics USA or Attenuation USA, Purple Hearts USA, Holy Miracles USA, 140 thing about Fairland, Texas, and you know, Highway 59 USA. And the thing with this is that Highway 59 seemed to be one of the only landmarks that identify it seemed to be the biggest issue about the backside of the US $1 bill and the alphanumeric value, ultimately the McDonald's Golden Arches and McDonald's Hot Cafe coffee cup at the alphanumeric value of like 58. But yet, going a little bit beyond that, it's like a combine of pi r squared and E equal MC squared and a 90-degree identifying what would normally be vertical as a 1 at a 90-degree at the center point would identify the EE, and it is the EE between calculus and quantum about that left side, and like the euro dollar identifying region 2, and the difference between like monetary and domestic of like the wooden buffalo nickel, ultimately 84 lumber, states and embassies, and like think about lumber being somewhere in Pearland, and that one buffalo nickel is almost like chasing Capital One side by side almost. It's almost kind of like a combined student loan with a Pell Grant, or like monopolizing capitalization, and how family law seems to be the deal about, falsely granting the idea of an adoption. Adoption actually being, the alphanumerics in 94, the Y2K as like a combined alphanumeric numerical combined of being like 94. It's like a Roe v. Wade thing. But the thing with this is that Roe spelled with the ROE is like 38, okay, with the W. Like a PG being like 23, the W, or GMC. PG is like, like 23, like Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, and a different perspective of 23 English alphabetical letters with like, 5-letter acronyms. I think there's like 4 5-letter acronyms and 1 3-letter acronym Alpha, Delta Kappa, see, Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, totaling like 23 English alphabetical letters. But the thing with this is that, that song by Nelson, it seemed to be the thing about amber waves of grain and the baptism, you must be first be baptized with water, not many days hence you shall be baptized with the Holy Ghost. And that seemed to be about the G at the Bein venue in Geneva, Switzerland, of human civil rights that goes beyond, in my mind, a method of banking as investment terminology on the expenditure side of the alphanumerics, like being itemized as itemization. And it seemed to be something about, itemization. I was like on ARO, okay? And I just thought, I was thinking about, all that information like I'm talking about now. And I decided to do something about like identifying, like every possible account, okay, of SAN software and storage area network and securities area network based on international financial management and vice president networks involved with like the idea of like a SAN software or how the kernel actually and computer programming and languages as some idea of like programming and some idea of a partition. What a kernel is not to a partition or Ajax language. Which is like the alphanumerics are like 36 and chasing oil, but it's like the white thing about it. So like in any case, so I mean, how kernel is involved, with the idea of a partition, it seems to be whether or not if it's the only idea of human capital or making a grade, beyond, thought of like a monetary and domestic of like neighbors as compared to a commercial venue of living quarters. The thing with this, it seems that making a grade beyond like internet protocol of a local area network of maritime law seemed to be really sometimes as some idea of a kernel as a deed restriction. So Michael Jackson's like, and this was like 23, okay, but the thing about 23 is like Dr. Pepper, the DR of Dr. is like a deed restriction, yet Pepper being like the black thing, which is the one and only about a 23-year anniversary celebration and the 23 ingredients. And the alphanumerics was like a CEO, corporate executive officer, or GMC. Yet it presents the idea of like additives and preservatives and byproducts in a way that give the impression that would give some idea of like involving quantum and like electronic power. And it seemed to be the thing about, litigation back on risk of habeas corpus. That seemed to be the issue of like deed restrictions, absentee voting, carbon footprints, and mechanics liens. And the thing of whether or not if a preliminary purchase of product registration of a birth certificate or a foreknowledge of that fact is the issue of like the idea of bartering and trading citizenship as a carbon footprint. or, you know, monopolizing capitalization ultimately. And it seemed to be the thing about, you know, in that way that all that information, it seemed like the presence is so the word in family law. It's almost like assumed based upon presence, giving the impression the appearance, you know, parents used to say, it's not what you know, but who you associate with. And the thing is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And maybe so, I mean, if that's the idea of a mechanics lane, or television programming, or the thought of the idea of like a deed restriction only because of television, and only television, just turn it on, of K television, even W. But the thing is that in my mind, it seemed to be somewhere in my mind that between like the Persian Gulf and like Latin America, based upon the information between Al Qaeda identifying factors of like something that seemed to be like Tony Orlando and Don singing that song, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years. Do you still want me? And it seemed that that song is kind of like, it's almost like, you know, getting yellow bands around packages from like Amazon.com. It's kind of like, I mean, it's been like really not cool about what's been going on with deliveries and certain factors, and it's kind of like almost like that Orlando, that Pulse Club in Orlando. I mean, it's like the Pulse Club is kind of like the Persian and Latin America identifying Delta forces, and like 2 triangles being like, you know, the idea of like identifying, you know, an electronic schematic symbol as a Delta force. And it seemed to be that Pulse Club involving world news, and you know that shooting was like going on out there. It's kind of like it seemed to be that that's the location identifying like Delta force of like, you know, the Persian Gulf and Latin America. Yet, you know, Cricket Wireless sold the Pulse phone here in Pearland. It was like presenting, you know, in my thought, like, you know, you've heard the commercial, I like the Sprite in you. It's kind of like, are you sure? Are you sure you know what you're talking about? Because it seemed to be the thing about the book of jurisprudence with the black back. It kind of puts the real not funny situation about, you know, are you sure you like the Sprite in someone? are you really sure you know what you're talking about? Is really kind of what it gets to. And it seemed to be that jurisprudence with the black back kind of identifies, you know, the factor of warehousing. And the only thing about warehousing, that one word of warehousing, repudiation, you know, linking television program to like real estate and state statutes annotated, seemed to be the thing, you know, really about that one song. And I've been really thinking about it, because going through the Stargate program, I mean, I didn't realize, you know, I didn't consider like really not anything about it a Stargate program. Although, you know, I'd seen, you know, like stars, you know, like involving television, motion picture, and like entertainment. But it still wasn't my idea. But there was like a real intense 6 to 9 month period, if not an entire year. And sometimes I kind of like wonder, I mean, if there's like any more. But I mean, and a 25 to 30 year period passed by, and it was that long. But it was after, like, you know, in 2020 when I really started putting myself on YouTube with my drums and lighting, like you're seeing on me now, with like, you know, 3D animation. Someone like got my fractal, wow, a splendor of color and kaleidoscope. It's like I'm already like have what I think about it already. Okay, I'm sure that's like almost anticipated that. I'm not really liking something about, you know, the expected anticipation, okay, about that happening, okay. In any case, so like I use that in like some of my music videos, and I just like it seems to be like the more I talk about certain issues on YouTube or on my phone, that a foreknowledge of performance monitoring is continually like a webmaster, a network administrator, or Wi-Fi manager, or, you know, some idea of like, you know, legal tender for all that, both public and private, of like constitutional law, and, you know, like a public service announcement, you know, for the entire world of Region 0. You know, it's like, you got to be kidding me. God, you got to be kidding me. I mean, that's not even like, you know, channeling. It seemed to be like a whole different like world of Region 0. In that way, they notice like legal tender for all debt, both public, hold on. A legal tender for like all debt? Wait a minute, hold on. Yeah, sure, man. Legal tender for the debit, okay, the debit, yeah. Okay. You know, sometimes like identifying a tax credit, I mean, it doesn't really give the impression, although supplemental security is non-taxable income, that the 1040 EZ form normally presents a lower income that normally a lot of times a total complete refund. And then after that, it's like a prepaid tax, becoming the similarities of non-taxable income of supplemental security. But all that constitutes law having a right to assemble, the freedom of speech and freedom of press, as compared to and combined with patents, trademarks, and copyrights, and product registration, and all this stuff like practice makes perfect, and the issue of like copyright not necessarily being a breach of copyright, and all that freedom of speech and freedom of press in that way, having a right to assemble on a continental level. It kind of like almost seemed to be the thing about the recent statute and the IRA. And what's left between the acronym of the recent statute and the IRA is the SE, and the AOL about Apple and Oracle and Apple iPhone SE, which is also the alphanumeric for like 24. The SE, or like the HOA, Homeowners Association, and GMAC, like a promissory notes, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, and the IEEE of the International Electronic Engineering. Okay, all 24, and the thing about even the ER. Anyway, I'm not going to go that direction right now, but it seemed to be that one song. It seemed to be Nelson. After the rain washes away the tears. Tears is actually in like networking, normally of like switching and routing on a hubbing side of hardware of stacks. Tears, okay, and then they sing this song. It would almost be the emotional thing. Maybe it's a perception of maybe neglect based on lack of experience, not knowing anything about. I think it's the layers, the performance, the transport, and there's like the layers of like the tiers, the layers, the internet protocol, the IP address. Stacks of that normally require like something that would be automatic of like Cisco, that involve like public and private communication, yet networking. Cisco presents the switching around that include telephone as compared to public and private in the way of like telephones, yet I think the similarities of practical application of like networking itself as compared to like telephones. But I mean, Cisco's the one that actually presents the public and private that way. And the bars seem to be ultimately getting to like the roller coaster about the polls, and the only thing about the polls it seemed to be the issue of like really the front cover of the book, GIT with the roller coaster ride with the polls, like you would see like maybe at Disneyland or Disney World. It's kind of like a different than any other roller coaster. It does the spiral, the loops, and the twist and all that, with the way it's designed with the poles. And Cisco kind of like has that giving the impression of like what would look like maybe a cycle per segment, likewise yet a roller coaster at the same time. And it seemed to be that one book of the GIT, Geospatial Information Technology, being the GIT of like 36 and chasing oil. And something about that seemed to present, the secrets of how the Federal Reserve runs the country. And my thought about geospatial information technology and some other information that seemed to be involving, whether or not it's something in between, like on Highway 288 from like RPM to like Bass Pro. And Pro Bass Pro, I've seen it both ways. But it seemed to be, the Bass being something like building automated systems, building automation systems. But in case, yeah, so it's kind of like I was kind of having to think about, somewhere in between like geospatial information technology and the Pro Bass thing about Vice President networks at the front lines have like freshwater fish presenting some idea that would get the similarities of a pool. There seemed to be a thing about a combine of student loans, normally associated with the word of collections, having the right to assemble. It's like totally tax-free as a percentage of defaulted student loans on a continental level. I mean, yet it's almost like Pro Bass, the freshwater thing about beyond the front lines of the beach run of Vice President networks. It's almost like 240% in the pawn shop, identifying, a person might not know that they're experiencing some kind of stuff that actually led them to, but the 240%, it's like a demanded requirement at a minimum. I think it's only appliances like a commercial venue of living quarters that's not affected by television programming. It's not a neighborhood, but a living quarter, a commercial venue, a living quarter. that it's not a neighborhood, but it's a living quarter. It's a venue, separate from like monetary and domestic. I guess the categorization of like the wooden buffalo nickel, identifying the MC in the states that way, and the thing about monetary and domestic of neighborhoods as compared to gross national product of the three aggregates. Yeah, it's already gone 45 minutes, but I was wanting to. I keep like going different direction, but it's saying I was thinking about the Nelson song, okay, and it seemed to be the thing about the baptism, and it seemed to be like the one of the Houston, Texas area, we international, and it seemed to be really the SixFlags baptism, and you must be first be baptized with the holy water, and then not many days hence you shall be baptized with the Holy Ghost, and the host and the ghost thing. And ultimately, it seemed to be like a requirement somehow of like some idea of like a Deep Star 6 into two ocean or not to ocean. And it seemed to be the information of the secrets of the temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, identifying the history of the U.S. dollar in Latin America in reference to like Al Qaeda and the Persian Gulf. And it seemed to be something about identifying, the Delta forces in that way that have the information that would be maybe something really not cool about it. So like this is what I kind of like to think about, the Tony Orlando and Dawn thing about tie yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years. And the 3 long years seem to be the thing about great expectations. And the catalyst I had in the Houston Chronicle, I think it was a 3-year period, if I'm not mistaken. For a 6-week period, like it was alternating between 6 and 8, like of not doing it. But for a 6-week period, normally on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, great expectations was like make America great again. And my thing about those ads and the catalyst, and it seemed to be the significance of those two, and electronic power, like attenuation being 140 in Pearland, Texas, and Pearland, Texas, USA, like Houston, Texas, and electronic power and we international, and the difference between the E and E and how that's like symbolic and analytically identified on the backside of the US $1, the symbolic representation, and it defines the difference in transition. I don't know if I'd call it transition, but the E in calculus and the E in quantum that has the structure that calculus does not, and it identifies the EE and the difference only because of McDonald's Hot Cafe Coffee, because the actual letters are 3 simple methods of addition of calculating that symbolic representation. It's like 58 and only one more, and it presents all that the difference between the E in calculus and E in quantum, and the structure in the 90 degree, and the pi squared, the E equals MC squared. Ultimately, the thing about quantum and going beyond calculus of like exponential quotients of power and multiplication, and reading like Japanese from top to bottom, which seemed to be almost like the audio on my mobile phone, doing it like an audio recording on my phone, and having my like camcorder like cam on the left side, like on the backside of the US $1 bill, the eye on top of the pyramid. And it's almost like auditing legal media and the parameters and the vertical absolute value, reading, like Japanese from top to bottom, the thing about the structure. I think there's only 2 that are actually, that's my impression I got anyway, of the Japanese letter. It's like 2 of them identifying the actual structure used in formative computation and in quantum, and Japanese being 7-1 in Pearland, and ultimately thing about it seemed to be like identifying the factor of like Diners Club symbolic representation and the font size of Diners Club, and how that's like almost like the deal about Boulder, Colorado, and the television series of like with Mork and Ork, Robin Williams, and Pam Dopper, and Boulder, Colorado, about the font size, and ultimately the size about 990 thing of like the V-twin and Line 6V series, or the idea of like the pastel green, the pastel red, the 13-back graphic equalizer, identifying like infrared and infragreen of night vision, and the Eggman thing about it, and the Easter egg basket and the resurrection about Mork from Ork, doing the Eggman fly and be free thing, and it seemed to be a thing about really even Mount Olives, and what that is to the rock, and the rectangle of like the hood ornament Lincoln Continental, presenting the idea of the rectangle identifying like high-rise towers of power, and other factors involving corporate venue as compared to commercial venue of living quarter. So like anyway, so like I was wanting to think about that because as far as like linguistic and alphanumerics, I mean, it's saying to me, all that ultimately is getting to the Boolean chart of the principles of digital audio, and that one thing about the WPG being 23, and the Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi also like the 23, and Dr. Pepper, and the thing about the 23-year anniversary celebration and the 23 ingredients, and it seemed to be like once again the Tony, Orlando, and Don. It's almost like that Pulse Club, identifying delta forces that are some idea of like really not the cool situation about some idea like information that is identifying the U.S. dollar in Latin America, but it seemed to be the ocean into ocean, or not the ocean thing about identifying two delta forces of like a Deep Star 6 thing, as compared to the Israeli flag of 6-point stars, but two delta forces, and identifying the electronic schematic symbols. It seemed to be the idea of like involving like monetary and domestic of neighborhoods that way. But anyway, it's already going on 51 minutes like right now, and I want to include that because it seemed to be the thing about the Bein venue, and it's kind of like I was referring to, you must be baptized with water, then 98 cents, you must be baptized with the Holy Ghost, and the G and the host, and it seemed to be the G of the Bein venue being BEIN being 30, yet it's like I was taken there, and I as for a 25 30 year period went by, but like world news and national news, and like YouTube, and because of a screensaver of the Earth's most wealthiest museum, and that's when I knew without absolutely not a doubt that memory had been a major huge deal involving the Stargate program. And all of a sudden a lot of videos were like popping up after I kind of like mentioned that, and kind of like reactivated. It's almost like that Earth, Wind, and Fire song, September, do you remember? Never was a cloudy day kind of like thing, and it seemed to be really about the song about a lot of air raids going on between like 1994, 95, and 96 of the World Trade Center, But ultimately it seemed to be like even like 1995 and the skyline being the Alpha of 95, and like emergency, and ultimately like a 911 call. It seemed that Geneva, Switzerland, the summit meeting presenting in 1995 the Lexus LFSA, and it's almost the black and white interior seemed to be identifying the deal about the difference between Deep Star 6 and the difference of like the Israeli flag with 6-point star, and Univision that way of the 3 pastels in the black, the 3 pastels in the white. It's almost like the North Pole and South Pole by comparison. But yeah, I was kind of like thinking about that because it seemed to be that one jet and the music video like Dream Theater with a producer like Randall Garcia, and George Bush is in it, and had mentioned some information and involving Will Not Falter. It seemed to be automatically in my mind when he was like referring to and Will Not Falter, it's like automatically in my mind like International Financial Management, the Lincoln Continental Hood Ornament and International Financial Management of SAN Software, and like the tennis court. Yeah, so it's automatically in my mind, when I hear that word Falter, it's like the tennis courts on 9 and like 18-hole golf courses, and International Financial Management and SAN Software, automatically in my mind. But in case, so like kind of like think about that, because it seemed to be the thing that that one jet is like a cargo, and it has similarities with the Russian presidential jet, except one is like in that music video of like the World Trade Center, the Dream Theater, Sacrifice Signs, but it's a cargo jet, and it seemed to be a thing about a mind's eye of a military bill determined, and like a Bette Midler song, okay. But it seemed to be that, and like I'm assuming Chicago, and something about like a Black Moon Rising, representing some idea of like a dual magnification, and it seemed to be like in my mind, it's like Ivanka that podium right in front of it, and certain factors have me actually being in a point of view on gurneys, if like certain music videos that identify certain factors as a point of view of like certain people at a podium. They gave the color code of like identifying factors that would present the podium and a point of view of like even the World Trade Center of 9/11 as a point of view at the podium. It seemed to be that the Black Moon Rising is almost like identifying. Now, I'm not sure if it's Tommy Lee Jones, but he's like in front of an 18-wheeler, and I think it's on a huge area of an airport, I think. But the Black Moon Rising is almost like the reference to like Al Qaeda, identifying, you know, like some idea of like Delta forces between like the Persian Gulf and Latin America. The Black Moon Rising thing is almost in my mind like a dual magnification of like a Boeing jet. It's like the phenomenally huge thing beyond the norm, and it seemed to be like that of like Chicago. And I don't know if that's like a normal standard, but it seemed to be like a phenomenally like a larger jet than the normal largest. Okay, and it almost seemed to be about the Black Moon Rising, identifying some Japanese factors of quantum, and a Deep Star 6 thing about, you know, even the Spore Stone of orthopedic surgery, and that one song Oceans Deep, where feet may fail, somewhere between Sydney, Australia, and the thing about information, and you know, I'm thinking about, you know, the Brian Houston of Hillsong. At the same time, I'm thinking of like Nelson and the song After the Rain, and it seemed to be it's almost like linking the Social Security Administration of like iron ore, and the night vision of like thermal heat seeking of like the color for amber waves of grain, the G rain, for purple mountains, like purple being 88 in like California. I mean, all the information, I mean, explained like the California Angels, Nola Ryan, Texas Rangers, and the Houston Astros, and the deal about the Blue Angels, and the prefix of the White House 4, 5, and 6, and the Blue Angels jet formations. And all this information, it seemed to be a period of years after I'd got on YouTube from like 1979 to the year 2022. 2 years after I was like really getting serious about my lighting, like you see on me now with my drum set, Pearl Vision VSX and a Strata Red drum set. Yeah, so in any case, so like it seemed to be the thing about all the ISS mounting, the alphanumerics of 52, and now the Strata Blue. I'm working on the Strata Blue, like doing the same with total of 35 pieces. But anyway, yeah, so like it seemed to be like that Tony, Orlando, and Don is that yellow ribbon. And it seemed to be that's identifying like Great Expectations and the Catalyst, and I think it was a 3-year period. And I'm not sure if it's like grouped at 3-year periods, but I know that might be the 3 long years that song is referring to. Yeah, it's identifying Catalyst and Great Expectations, which is a little bit of humor, like Christian humor a little bit, finally meeting the expectation of the high society on the breaking sound barrier on the Concord. You know, like a concordance in the King James Version Bible, or, you know, like a religious Bible, the concordance and the Concord breaking the sound barrier. And it's like the book, almost like the Secrets of the Temple, how Buddha runs the country, and some idea of the name Robert. I mean, it seemed to be the alphanumerics of 78, and the exact opposite of 87. You know the truth in the new accomplished minus transfiguration, ultimately getting to 12, and 12 numerically is like 87 alphanumerically. And like a miracle God, and all this stuff about the 12 photos of our brains, and 12 tribes of Israel, and, you know, 12, and ultimately getting to like all that information of like 12 tribes of Israel, and ultimately, you know, the 144,000 and like corporations in that way. But anyway, yeah, so like I want to include that because it seemed to be that one biblical scripture. You must be first baptized with the water, then not many days hence you shall be baptized with the Holy Ghost. And it seemed to be about going through like beyond the Bluebird bus and being like put on the Airbus H160, and I'm thinking that's how I got to Geneva, Switzerland. I mean, I'm so not for sure, but I'm assuming that's something about how I got there, you know. And I wonder, I mean, I didn't remember anything, really hardly anything about it for like a 25 to 30 year period. But after I realized that memory had been such a phenomenally huge issue, that's when I really started calling a Stargate program beyond the idea of a normal circuit involving like Wien International, and realized, you know, that's something about the Airbus 160 going beyond the Bluebird bus, identifying, you know, some idea of like human capital beyond a method of banking, some idea being itemized on the expenditure side, and the alphanumerics 141, even Western Auto having some alphanumeric value, of like 131, 132, and 141 of Western Auto, and something about Los Angeles that way. And something I was like to really thinking about the 1040, 1041 itemization, AF Pont W192, G190.2, and no 76 Osmium. And I was kind of like thinking about, the Oasis of Love and Lakewood Church and sanitation and Bill Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton. Anything other than, the thought of like a not limited to saying software or storage area networking, securities and annuities of international financial management and globalization. Ultimately, not limited to the toilet or some domiciled head of household, with the Tidyville man, yeah. And the cover-up, yes, the cover-up of the top secret CIA Stargate program. Yeah, like Route 66, huh? Disintegrate. Yeah, it's kind of like a beyond the Halo schematic, thing about the toilet, yeah. Route 66 and the Better Business Bureau, Birdbat Baptism, and the Psychic Warrior, America's foremost psychic spy. Yeah, and the cover-up like a bird bath. Of the top secret, like the Japanese walk, the amphibious thing of J. Edgar Hoover and some domiciled 180, right? Yeah, all right, yeah. So, anyway, it's already going on, like an hour and 1 minute and 10 seconds. But I won't include that. But about the 1040, 1041 itemization, A Pont W, 192, G190.2, I know 76 Osmium. It seemed to be, the thing about, sanitation and the idea of like accounts, beyond, the thought of not limited to some idea of like storage area network or securities and annuities or, what time means, based upon, placement and actual participation other than, like staring at the wall, I want to do that. It's already going on, like, God, 1 hour, 1 minute, and yay, 51 seconds, all right, 151, wow, so I guess it's break time now. Okay, well, anyway, there it is. That's kind of like what's going on right now. Okay, there it is, yeah.